Hello, this is Mr. Wolf, and we are wrapping up Blood on the River, Jamestown 1607 by Elisa Carbone, and today we are reading the author's note. I grew up in Virginia, and so I studied the Jamestown story every time we covered state history. Then, in 2002, my historical novel Storm Warriors won the Virginia Jefferson Cup Award, and suddenly I was booked to speak at schools all over Virginia. I was wondering what to write about next, so as I visited these schools, I asked teachers and librarians for suggestions. What would you most like to see a new novel about? I asked. The answer came over and over. Jamestown. I thought, that old story? John Smith and Pocahontas again? Boring. That was before I started my research. When I looked into what really happened, looked beyond the dry textbooks I had studied as a child, I discovered a thrilling, exciting adventure story. The challenge for me in writing historical fiction is always, how can I see, hear, feel, taste, smell, know what the main character experienced? Luckily for me, the entire Jamestown fort, the 3 ships, and a Powhatan Indian village have all been recreated at the Jamestown settlement, complete with historical interpreters, gardens, muskets that really fire, without bullets of course, corn that needs to be shucked, and all of the artifacts you can imagine. In addition to the Jamestown settlement, the newly rediscovered original Jamestown fort is being excavated by archaeologists. Every day they are uncovering pieces of pottery, building foundation, post holes from the original palisades, and even graves from the early Jamestown years. I spent day after day at these 2 sites researching, asking questions, and generally absorbing the feel of it, and trying to transport my imagination back in time nearly 400 years. At one point I decided to do a bit of reenacting myself, and so in May of 2005, I set up camp on the shores of the James River, not far from the original fort. The sights and sounds that greeted me at dusk, midnight, and sunrise gave me the feel of what Samuel Collier must have experienced that May of 1607, when the colonists first landed. Of course, some of my research was book research, too. Several of the early Jamestown settlers wrote the story of their journey from England and of what happened here in the New World. Thank goodness scholars came before me and took the old-fashioned English spelling and modernized it so that it was much easier to read. Here is an example of what the original writing was like, taken from Sir Thomas Dale's June 10th, 1613 letter to Henrico. And you really need to look at the screen right here to look at how strange it looks. If plenty victuals will stope these cursed people's mouths, surely this harvest being in, they will have in great abundance. But if a greater number be sent England, must provide bread corn for them, until they may reap of this fructus of their own labors. Whew! I'm so glad I didn't have to read that kind of thing for hours. Here is the modernized version from Edward Wright Hale's book, Jamestown Narratives, Eyewitness Accounts of the Virginia Colony. If plenty of victuals will stop these cursed people's mouths, surely, this harvest being in, they will have in great abundance. But if a greater number be sent, England must provide bread corn for them, until they may reap these fruits of their own labors. It's still not the easiest thing in the world to understand, but that was where my job came in, using those original records along with other sources to create a story that could be understood and enjoyed by young readers in the 21st century. Another note about spelling. English spelling in the early 1600s had not yet been standardized. People wrote phonetically, and when accents changed, spellings changed. There were no spelling tests. The same word was sometimes spelled in two different ways, even in the same sentence. When it came to place names and people's names, variations became even greater. For example, I found 11 different spellings for the name Lord de la Warre. De la Warre, Loire, Delaware, Delaware, etc. There are 27 spellings for Warasquoiac. Even Jamestown changes its spelling from two words, Jamestown with an E. I have tried to standardize the spelling of proper names within the book, but you may see them spelled differently in other sources. Working with original records is not always easy, especially when the same event is described by different people in different ways. For example, in Chapter 8, I mentioned Fort Caroline, the French colony in Florida that was destroyed by the Spanish. There is a Spanish version and a French version of that incident. The Spanish said they killed 130 to 140 men and spared the lives of 50 to 60 women and children. The French said everyone was slaughtered, even the women and children. There is no way to know which version is correct, and I simply had to pick one when telling my story. Another challenge in using original records is that sometimes they describe things that seem to be impossible. Like the incident in Chapter 6 where a swordfish and thresher shark attack and kill a whale. This same incident was cited not just one, but two of the early settlers. William Strachey described the swordfish pricking the whale in the belly with his sharp and needle fin, and both Strachey and Percy described the thresher beating the whale with his fins or flails. And yet I have heard that fish don't act this way. Did it really happen as it was described? Or did these men misinterpret what they saw? Or maybe the whole thing is just a fish story. Speaking of fish stories, the modern-day Carib Indians say those stories about their ancestors being cannibals are nothing but lies. Some historians believe that Europeans created the image of Carib Indians as cannibals in order to justify the fact that they treated the natives so brutally. One of the most controversial elements of the Jamestown narratives is the incident where Pocahontas laid her head over Captain Smith's head, protecting him from her father's warriors who stood over him, their clubs raised. Some historians believe that the incident never even happened. Others believe Pocahontas really did save Captain Smith's life, that Chief Powhatan's warriors really were about to beat Captain Smith's brains out with those clubs. Still, others believe in the adoption ceremony interpretation of the events. This is the one that made the most sense to me, and so I have used it in my story. I do want to set the record straight about one thing. No matter what you have heard or seen in the movies, there is absolutely no evidence, not even a hint, that there was ever any romance between Captain John Smith and Pocahontas. The Jamestown story is a story of culture clash, and this presented some challenges in terminology. For example, the English saw Pocahontas as a princess because she was the daughter of the Powhatan ruler, or in the Englishmen's minds, the Powhatan king. But in Powhatan society, power does not pass through royal families from father to son or daughter, the way it does in England. Instead, the line of succession went from Chief Powhatan to his brothers, then to his sisters, and then to his sisters' children. Pocahontas was not in line to inherit any power. Another term that got my attention was this entry in early settler William Strachey's Algonquin English word list. Wa, their word for wonder. Compared to this entry in the modern-day Grolier's dictionary, wow, used in expressing wonder. Jamestown historian Edward Wright Hale states that our word wow most likely came from the Algonquin word wow. It's the same pronunciation. The British surname wow is pronounced wow, so Strachey was just writing phonetically. I know most dictionaries say the word wow comes from Old Scottish, but a whole collection of dictionaries will tell you that the term powwow comes from Algonquin and means literally he dreams. It originally referred to a medicine man or conjurer whose domain was the world of wonder. Opinions will vary on this, but I tend to agree with Mr. Hale that our word wow most likely comes from the Algonquin language. This book, like my other historical novels, is a mix of what really did happen and what could have happened. All of the major events and most of the minor events are based on what happened on the journey from England and in Jamestown, as described in the narratives written by the settlers themselves. All of the characters, once the story leaves England, were real people. Samuel Collier was a young boy who came to Virginia on one of the first 3 ships as Captain Smith's page. I did have to invent Samuel's backstory, his family life and origins. The records indicate that Samuel went with Captain Smith on 2 expeditions. The first was to Werowocomoco in the fall of 1608, where the Indian maidens did their warriors' dance. On the second expedition en route to Werowocomoco, Samuel was left to live at the Weriscoyac village for a time. Samuel did stay in Virginia when Captain Smith left for England. The 4 boys who came over on those first ships were Samuel Collier, Richard Mutton, James Brumfield, who really was just 9 years old, and Nathaniel Peacock. One boy was killed in the first large-scale Indian attack in 1607, and it was neither Samuel nor Nathaniel, because their names appear on later lists. I had to choose either James or Richard to be the one who was killed in the attack, and so I decided it would be James. Though in some instances the dialogue is taken from the original records, for the most part I have invented dialogue, thoughts, personalities, and the like, and I have simplified a story that is far too complex to be contained in one book. Descendants of the Powhatan Empire still live in Virginia. To learn more about the Virginia Indians today, visit the website of the Virginia Council of Indians, www.indians.vipnet.org. There are 8 state-recognized tribes: Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattapony, Monacan Indian Nation, Nansemond, Pamunkey, Rappahannock, and Upper Mattapony. Their culture is kept alive within their close-knit communities and is shared with the public through their tribal museums and celebrations at powwows that feature drumming, singing, dancing, and other traditional arts. To read it more in depth about Jamestown and the Virginia Indians of the past, I would recommend Love and Hate in Virginia, John Smith, Pocahontas, and the Heart of a New Nation by David A. Price, First People, The Early Indians of Virginia by Keith Elgoff and Deborah Woodward, and The Double Life of Pocahontas by Jean Fritz. If you possibly can, go to Jamestown, Virginia, and see it for yourself. The following websites will help you plan either a virtual or real-life visit to Jamestown: the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, www.apva.org, Colonial National Historical Park, www.nps.gov/COLO, Jamestown Settlement, www.historyisfun.org. For more information about Blood on the River, Jamestown 1607, including teacher study guides, visit www.elisacarbone.com. I hope you all enjoyed listening to Blood on the River, and have a wonderful